So this is a picture from the event yesterday at Morehouse College. Me, Kamau, and on the far right there is Dr. Andrew Douglas, who put this together, who you will remember, among other things, is a co-author with Jared Loggins of Prophet of Discontent about Dr. King. And we were there to talk about HBCUs, and I'll say versus the Black University, but also about modern monetary theory. Du Bois and cooperatives came up again. And so let me somehow the blue field experiment. And I know Dr. Jessica Gordon Emhard writes about this, which I thought was interesting because the way she writes about it is kind of making the point I brought up the other day. The Bluefield was formerly an HBCU. It's no longer an HBCU. It's now, I think, predominantly a white college. But this article points out, and then I went and found this other. I was going down, the long story short is that this article talks about this HBCU effort at cooperative economics. And one of the arguments that it makes, quoting something that Jessica Gordon Emhart had co-written some years ago, was that HBCUs, and this was actually interesting. The argument here is that once it says HBCUs at one point did offer more critical teaching and critical political economy, but by now this leadership has largely disappeared. And they quote an article co-authored by Dr. Nemhard. And when I went and pulled the article, I did not see where this point was made. So I maybe have to go back. I was, I don't want to. But what I did find in the article was that, and this was something, the framing that people, including Professor Nemhard, want to put on cooperatives about their potential to do good is, I think, lessened when you look at, for instance, Bluefield. So Bluefield doesn't it goes on for a while. It in the 30s and into the 40s they developed this cooperative. It does some good. And then the West Virginia state decides that having a cooperative business run on a public university, and of course a black one, had a negative impact on the local economy, so they shut it down. Which is again sort of one of the points that I was. But in Dr. Nemhard's book about cooperatives, when you read about Bluefield, she doesn't mention the why it gets shut down. She only mentions that the project gets shut down. She says something to the effect West Virginia didn't really appreciate it, so they shut it down. But she doesn't explain what they're arguing. I don't even think she says that much. And my point is that I think that that's done because she doesn't want, and others don't want to, while they're defending cooperatives, as this story is, and while this article does the same thing that Dr. Nemhard does, it's saying that Du Bois supported economic cooperatives without acknowledging that after 1940 he did not. But to maintain the frame, you have to say that the project got shut down, but you don't really fully explain why. So the again, the relationship to the economy isn't fully appreciated. That the role of public policy isn't fully appreciated. The role of this fantasy of a segregated economy is exploded and not fully explained when you don't lay out the reasons for why these kinds of cooperative and other and similar efforts don't work, or why some like Du Bois eventually say they won't work. Because as Du Bois said, as we talked about last week, if you do a cooperative without the state involved, it's going to fail. If you do it with the state involved, it's socialism. The state doesn't want socialism, so the state crushes cooperative efforts in service of private enterprise, in this case in West Virginia. So this article goes through the same sort of standard story about Du Bois claiming that he supported cooperatives, and they, champion the idea of not only cooperatives, but what I do actually like about this article is that they do argue for a black business school emancipatory business curriculum. Now, it may to me sound fanciful, but there's at least this idea that, for me, even if we may disagree on cooperatives and whatever, what I do like is that they're saying, hey, even if Jared couldn't find the reference in the article that's cited here, there's an argument that HBCUs once offered more critical political economy teaching, and we should get back to that. 100%. And if it's not true that they once did, they absolutely should do it now. And they absolutely should use the business schools to try to come up with other cooperative and other methods of addressing the condition of Black communities collectively. And they should do it with the idea that universities, Black universities, should play a positive role in supporting their surrounding community. So, as the article says here, but the Bluefield experiment ended abruptly in 1934. In a letter addressed to Du Bois, Matney, the president of the college at the time, explained that the cooperative store was closed by a general state order that all stores in connection with the schools or state institutions be taken over by the state. So that's actually very interesting. State control over stores at that all stores in connection with schools or state institutions should be state run. State colleges could not go into business as they interfered with the private enterprise. And that little bit is not in Nemhard's book when she talks briefly about the Bluefield experiment, because again, the point is, even when you have to acknowledge that it didn't last long, or sort of win the day, you have to you can't really go into why it wouldn't have failed. That would be my speculation on the why. I did just note that there's no real explanation again in Nemhard's book. It's sort of described as a success story, in fact. That is the Bluefield experiment. She tells what the store was there to do. It was there to teach cooperative economics to the students and be a commercial laboratory for the application of business theory and practice. After 2 years in business, the cooperative had paid all its debts. The store began to pay dividends of 10% on purchases made. The student members voted to use the profits to pay for scholarships. They became members of the Cooperative League of the United States in 1925. After several years of successful operation, however, the state of West Virginia eventually forbade its continuance, according to Du Bois. The cooperative appears to have gotten some national attention. Du Bois quotes a comment made by a member of the Harvard University Graduate School of Education to the Bluefield Cooperative Society's manager about its promise as a model. I'm convinced that you all are doing a splendid piece of work with this enterprise, end quote. In this cooperative, as in the Citizens Cooperative stores in Memphis, education and training were integral aspects of cooperative development, both initially and throughout its existence. Not only did the Bluefield Cooperative educate members about cooperative ownership and business development, profits from the business were also used to send members for advanced educational degrees. Affordable membership was also the goal of the co-op. Finally, the success of the Bluefield Cooperative provides insight into how African American cooperatives inserted themselves into the wider national cooperative movement by joining the National White Association and attending national conferences. And then that's it. So again, to not go into detail as to why it was shut down and to show the limitations of these efforts, or to show just again that it didn't survive past, what was it, 34, is, I think it. But again, I don't know why I ended up on this Bluefield thing.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.